This place has fairly changed since I first came to the cages, which would have been 1975 as a 17-year-old. I can't even recognise it now, but I was on a number of cages. I've been in cage 14, cage 5, and cage 7. When I first came down to INLA cage, like, I would have been the youngest prisoner in the cage, and I was sort of looked on as like a wee mascot type person, well looked after. And what sort of struck me about the INLA cage was the great sense of comradeship and friendship that existed within the confines of the cage. We had our own command structure, and we had very, very little contact with the screws, which in hindsight was a very good thing. Like, we had two sort of living huts and what we called a half bap, which was sort of divided in two as a study room and a living quarters as well. And I think that there must have been 70, 80 INLA prisoners in during 1975. And what I also liked about our cage was that they were constantly and consistently attempting to escape. We were coming up with all sorts of escape plans, and therefore the screws were moving us from cage to cage to prevent escapes happening. There was one escape in 1975 when the boys went to remand court, and I think 4 of them escaped from Town Hall Street. And then there was another attempt for going over the wall, which was sort of thwarted early on. So they moved us then to cage 6, I think it was, which is at a lower sort of phase in the cages. And then there was an attempt to escape there. And then they moved us to cage 5. And shortly after moving to cage 5, we began a tunnel, and the tunnel actually began in what we called pads. Basically what you had like was a hut that would have been divided and with partitions on both sides with a sort of small corridor going up the middle here. And I can't remember exactly like how many sort of cells, pads would have been each side, but my pad would have been the second from the very end. And what you had was a sort of like a yard, and then a fence, and then you had the wall. And I'm sort of can't really sort of recall whereabouts now because everything's sort of knocked down here. But the tunnel began on my cell pad, and basically what happened like was that we dug approximately 6 feet down, and then we started digging towards the wall. And I think that it lasted maybe 3 weeks in total, 4 weeks maybe. And it's amazing the screws didn't catch it, like, you know, to be quite frank, like, and I think there's a lot of luck involved in it. But myself, like, I'd been just turned 18 at that particular time, and another guy from Armagh, who was very young as well, like those two had been sort of the smallest and the thinnest in the cage. So we would have done a lot of work at the actual face of the tunnel itself, and it was absolutely an amazing experience. It was. I can remember actually lying down in the tunnel at the face of the tunnel, and lying on my back taking a sort of breather, because you can only walk so long at the tunnel because of all the gases escaping from the soil itself. And we used to sort of maybe go up for maybe half an hour, dig so much, and then take a break, come up and breathe the fresh air, blah blah blah. So can I just lying down, like, and just thinking, like, this is the most highest top security jail in Europe, which are all spoofing about on, you know, in the media. And here I am lying down here, an 18-year-old, like, trying to dig my way out to freedom here for all our people, because I wasn't earmarked for actually escape myself, because even though I did get the fresh charges put on me, the release date was September of that year, and I believe basically the staff who says that there is no way I was going to get convicted of the charge that I was on for. I did get convicted actually later on, like. But anyway, you remember the actual day of the escape itself? Now, we're talking about like 11 people escaped, two came back, 2 was recaptured the next day, and 7 were never captured. And it was the biggest successful escape that did. I do know like there was a sort of big escape in 1974 when Hugh Cuny was shot dead. And I think the prisoners actually escaped for 2 days, 3 days. But at that point, like the INLA escape was the biggest, most successful one up until the 1983 escape. So I can remember actually very well that day. Like it was a sort of sunny day, and I think it was April or May of 1976, and we had a lot of rain, and seeing the rain was coming, like basically it was constantly flooding the tunnel up, like, and it was causing all sorts of problems. You had the roof caving in, and we actually had the roof caved in on a number of people who were digging the tunnel. And we had to actually pull them out by the feet. So we were actually very lucky, like, and people could have got killed, you know, doing it. So on the night itself, I can remember being asked did I want to go, and I says no, I'm not going to go because I'm going to pay the charges here. So we opened up a tunnel, and I think the tunnel was already half flooded. It was constantly raining. It was collapsing on the outside. So the boys went down, and as far as they went to the very end of the tunnel, and they poked up a stick with a white hanky on it, so we could view then from the cage like how far they had to go to the wall, and it wasn't a big distance. And now, as you can see them walls there yourself, like particularly down there, like that's the way they were, like they had them walls with a rounded top on them. They put them up after the escape, if I remember right. And I think during the escape the walls have been like that there. So we made a sort of grappling hook out of a chair, and we would have had sheets as the ropes, and the boys would have threw the grappling hook up. Now, if I remember right, there was a plank of wood that was lying somewhere close to the wall, so they threw that up over the wall, and they were able to slide down that there. So that was okay. That must have happened about maybe 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night time. The boys are away, and we were constantly waiting then for the Brits and the screws to come in. We were actually waiting for shots to be fired and stuff like that. We just didn't know if they'd be rumble or not, like, and people were taking a chance, like they would have been shot dead. This was proved 2 years prior to that when Hugh Cuny was shot dead, like. We were watching the Brit Towers to see if they rumbled onto anything, which they didn't, like. But people were taking a big chance, you know, and going, like, obviously they were aware Hugh Cuny was shot 2 years prior to that, though it really didn't feature in anybody's thinking, like, they didn't really care, like, we're just going off this wall, we're going to escape here. And the initial intentions on this escape was to clear out the whole case of people who was all going to do big time or facing big time, like. But because we had to improvise, because the tunnel was collapsing and it was on the point of being discovered, that we had to go early. So as I say there, like, you know, the boy, I can't mind what time the boys made the budget, like it must have been 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night time, like, and we were all helping them down the tunnel, like, they had money, they had fresh clothes as soon as we went out through the tunnel. Like, the tunnel was actually half flooded, and it was very, very dangerous. It was a very dangerous situation. So we were actually waiting, as it says, like, for the Brits to come in, the screws to come in, and nothing happened. This was all through the night, and like, we stayed awake all night. Screws would come down, they'd open the curtains, counting the prisoners, and then they came to my cell, which I wasn't in, like, but I was in somebody else's cell at that stage, or pad, and we heard something like "fuck me" and a run of feet, and we were all sort of sniggering and laughing because we had knew that the boys had got away. So next thing, like, I think it was about half an hour. I don't know many screws. I've never seen as many screws in my life. Like, came out of the cage, and they marched us out one at a time for ID purposes, and we refused to give our names and our numbers and stuff like that, in order to confuse the screws who actually had escaped. So they had to bring in their security team to identify each prisoner. So they brought us down to the canteen. And if I remember right, like, it kept us, I think it was 2 days in the canteen locked up while they'd done the searches, and they sealed the tunnel, and all our stuff, all our clothes, all our possessions was all fired down the tunnel and sealed over with concrete. So none of us had anything left. But the atmosphere and the cage among ourselves, the morale was sky high. Fantastic experience, and it was probably one of the best experiences of my life, like, during my whole period in prison. Like.